Welcome back to Moko Plays Satisfactory. Last episode we made some really good strides in getting our power infrastructure to be mostly automated and kind of nicely scalable as well. So we've set up this little biofuel production area where I can just drop in leaves and wood into these containers at the end, have these automatically turned into biomass, and then that biomass automatically turned into biofuel. And that's now coming along and being fed automatically into the biomass burners. Thanks to the change in 1.0 that lets us add conveyor belts into biomass burners. So that's really cool. That's going to take the headache out of a lot of our power struggles in the early game. Really, we just need to periodically run around the world and get some raw material and drop them in here and then not worry about the rest of it. This is kicking out a decent amount of power, so this gives us some flex to be able to expand out our factory. One thing I probably will need to do at some point is to double this up, but that's fine. We've got space there where we can just expand the platform a little and drop another run of biomass burners down the far side here, and then we'll just split off the biofuel at this point to go in two directions. And I think the throughput there should be fine. I think we've got quite a bit of, we have the capacity to create quite a bit more biofuel than we need right now, so that's all good. So the next thing that I want to focus on really is to take our kind of rough and ready starting iron production, which is running in this area, and creating iron plates, iron rods and screws, and to turn this into something bigger and more well managed as well. Now that we've got the ability to automate more of these parts to create machines, and we've got foundations as well, we can really start to give this some structure and to make it scalable. And then once we're done with iron, I'll take a look at our concrete production over here and our copper production, which is just around this ridge, and give those some more sense of order and have them scaled up a little bit as well. One of the last things that we did is to, we found a hard drive while we were exploring the world, and we set that away scanning. And that's now just completed a few minutes ago. So if we come into the MAM here, we can see you get a notification when it first scans, which I've already clicked into, but we can see in the hard drive library, here's the one that's scanned that I haven't chosen an alternate recipe for just yet. This is a change in 1.0. Previously, we would have had a choice of 3. Now we get a choice of 2, or we get the option to rescan the hard drive and get a different 2. But I'm going to go with the cast screw recipe here. This makes screw production much simpler. At the moment, we need to take iron ore, smelt that down into iron ingots, turn the ingots into iron rods, and then turn the iron rods into screws. And this removes that middle step. We're able to do ore into ingots, and then the ingots straight into screws. And I think the yield's a little bit better than the original recipe as well, so there's no reason for us to not take this, unless we were trying to do something like a screwless build, but that's a little bit complex. And some people prefer it because transporting screws around a factory has its own challenges. But I don't mind building with screws at all, and certainly at this stage in the game, this is a really good recipe for us to have, so I'm really pleased that came up at the first attempt. While we're here at the MAM, we can also drop in some extra stuff. So as we've been exploring the world, we've run into some power slugs and some caterium and some sulfur, so we can start to make progress on those trees as well. Hogs, we've got a few dead hogs in our wake, so let's see what this gets us.
The remains researched belong to an organism now dubbed the fluffy-tailed hog. It has many characteristics that would likely classify it among the Suidae family were it native to Earth. Hog remains can now be made into alien protein, and additional research may reveal options for improving pioneer safety during exploration.
That's cool. So the alien DNA capsules, if I remember rightly, or if this hasn't changed anyway in 1.0, we can feed these into an awesome sink and get awesome points faster than we can do by disposing resources. But it looks like there's some other downstream stuff here as well. Extra equipment slots, more inventory slots. Oh, and this is how we get into guns and healing and stuff as well. Cool. Haven't found any hatchers or stingers. Did find a couple of spitters.
The remains researched belong to an organism that tends to nest near objects emitting specific types of resonance. Spitters are called as such due to their ability to create and spit plasma across long distances. Spitter remains can now be made into alien protein, and additional research may reveal options for improving Pioneer safety during exploration.
Okay, so it looks like whichever animal we get, we're just going to end up on the same tree here. Caterium, though, is worth us starting to take a look.
The metal has been named Caterium after Fixit's greatest CEO, Katerina Parks. It has been added as a viable alternative to gold in industrial applications, specifically in advanced electronics due to its superconductivity, malleability, and corrosion resistance.
Cool, so this gets us Caterium ingots, which we don't quite have enough to unlock now, and then we'll get the ability to create quickwire, and this will let us get some extra tech. I'm hopeful that somewhere around here in the tree is still smart splitters. I think that's where they were in early access, and that's something that I find really useful and use a lot in my builds. So we might be exploring Caterium pretty soon here.
This semi-slug, now dubbed Power Slug, is early in its life cycle and has retained only part of its potential energy storage capacity, giving it its blue color. Power slugs are capable of extracting latent energy from their surroundings, including through a form of photosynthesis, and preserve it in their porous semi-crystalline shell over their lifetime. This explains why they rarely move after having found a suitable location.
Slug scanning, not the most useful thing in the world. We don't have enough rotors to unlock that yet. But we could, I think, create a power shard and then get into overclocking and underclocking. So that might be useful for us to do right now, actually. Hadn't planned on doing that today, but that's probably worth looking at.
This unknown chemical element was in reality an unusual mixture of solid sulfide and sulfate materials from which sulfur can be extracted. Sulfur's primary use lies in fertilizers, which we have no use for. Instead, this element enables access to more volatile obstacle clearing and pioneer defending tools.
Okay, so the rest of the sulfur tree needs coal, which we haven't found yet. Oh, we don't have any more blue power slugs, so we can't do what I was talking about in terms of getting the overclocking. That's all good. So the other thing we want to get is part assembly. We can see we've got the milestone in the top right. I think I should have everything we need for this right now, so let's get that unlocked.
Milestone reached. The assembler can produce more complex parts, including the first project part, smart plating, which is crucial for initiating project assembly. Project parts must be delivered to the space elevator. By completing your contracted duties as part of project assembly, you will definitely be helping achieve Fix-It Company goals without any other ulterior motive. Note: humans cannot craft project parts. Do not worry about your inadequate crafting skill when compared to an assembler. Fix-It cherishes your innate human abilities, such as walking, striking objects, and commodifying natural resources.
Okay, so we've got a couple of milestones left in tier 1 here. Neither of these is like super pressing for us or anything. Yeah, we can do these in any order, really. But having unlocked assemblers now is something that we're going to want to use in the next stage of build. So we've already automated the basic iron parts here. We've got plates and rods and screws being automated. The next stage of complexity in iron takes an assembler. It's like a constructor, but it's got 2 inputs here. And if we drop this down, we can take a look at the recipes. So smart plating we need for the space elevator, but we need to create both reinforced iron plates and rotors for that, so we're not ready to do that just yet. Reinforced iron plates we'll use in Mark II belts, which we unlocked last episode, and that's going to be more useful for us to transport goods around our factory factor and not be so constrained with belt throughput. So we're going to want quite a lot of those for this phase of the game. Modular frames, we need those reinforced iron plates and we need rods, so this is like an extra stage of complexity on top of this one, because we need to create some of these, store some of these, create more of these, and use them to make some modular frames. And then rotors, iron rods, and screws. Cool. So, given we're going to need quite a lot of reinforced iron plates, what I want to do while I'm thinking about working on the next stage of iron production, which we're going to do over here, I just want to set up a temporary reinforced iron plate production chain here. So what I'm going to do is take this iron rod machine and switch it over to iron plates, because we've got like nearly 1,000 iron rods in our inventory, and we don't need those for tons of stuff right now. I'm going to make sure there's none of those still filtering into here, and this keeps the belt that I'm going to attach to the output of this clean. If we tried to set this recipe to reinforced iron plates, and then there was still rods coming in to this conveyor and coming into one of these inputs, it would clog this machine, so it wouldn't actually be able to proceed and make the recipe. It's not smart enough to ignore the resources that it doesn't need, so you need to send it a dedicated belt, which we've now got. So we're creating iron plates only into here, and the other thing that needs is screws, so this belt work's going to be pretty messy, but again, this is just a quick temporary win while we're looking at the rest of this stuff. That doesn't look like it's connected, is it? Yes, cool. I wasn't sure if that was connected to the grid or not. So this should pretty soon start to create reinforced iron plates for us, and I'm just going to run those out to a storage over here. Again, a bit stuck for space at the moment, but this is all only going to be here for a few minutes while we do the other bits. So yeah, the main thing that I want to do with this next phase of iron build is to start to work and to use a couple of these pure iron nodes that we've got access to. Those are going to give us up to 120 iron per minute, hence why being able to use the Mark II belts is a good thing, because otherwise we'd be constrained. With our Mark I belt, these only carry 60 per minute. With our Mark II belt, these carry up to 120, so that removes that bottleneck. And we're going to need a fair bit of space to work in, so I considered removing all of this stuff and building down in this area, but I think we're going to want to be able to expand further than that. So what I'm going to do is just start to lay foundation platforms over here. I've held control while I dropped that first one, so that's on the global grid. And then we're just going to extend out over here. Now, one thing about foundations in this game is they need to be kind of placed on ground when you place the first one. I can't just place these anywhere, but once you've placed one, they will just extend themselves out everywhere, and you can in fact like remove the bit that ties it to the ground if you want to. You can just have a block just floating in midair if you so desire. Makes things look a little bit strange, but that's in fact pretty useful when we want to, for example, navigate the world and get to some, power slug that's halfway up a cliff or whatever. And also, it just means that building out over a nice wide open space like this is not a challenge, which is good, because if we look at the terrain around here, we've actually got all these changes in elevation, these cliffs and valleys and stuff like that would get in the way if we're trying to do a big completely open build. So building out over stuff or raising yourself up off the ground and building higher is an easy way to just make sure you've got all the space that you might need. I'm going to need some more concrete in a moment. I think this platform's probably about the right sort of size that we're going to need here. One thing that I do want to do is to make sure that, as well as space for all the machines, we're leaving ourselves a decent amount of space for the logistics, so to run belts and have splitters and mergers and stuff. Because I don't plan on doing this across multiple floors, and we don't have a ton of options in terms of, you know, being able to run belts like under the ground and stuff yet. Cool. So as I mentioned, what I want to do is to use 2 of these pure iron ore nodes. So each of those giving us 120 iron ore per minute. We're going to run those into some smelters, which I'm probably going to start about here. Make sure we've got a decent amount of space to get around and to merge and split and so on. And each smelter will take care of 30 iron ore per minute, so we're going to need 8 overall if we're using 2 of those pure nodes with Mark 1 miners. I'm just going to drop 4 down here to work with. 2, 3, 4. At first, to kind of get the basics of the design down, and then we'll duplicate that when we're ready to do the next bit. Okay, so we're going to have the iron ore coming in from this side of the platform. We're going to split this out on this this run of foundations. And we're just going to use a manifold pattern to do this. It's the kind of simplest way, in my view, to make sure that you're running, you know, getting all the machines fed without having a really complex setup of cables, and it takes up less space than trying to do any like load balancing or whatever. And this will ultimately balance itself out within a few minutes anyway. What will happen will be when we connect the iron ore coming in here. Because the splitters split 50-50, this machine's going to get more than it needs at first, which means that the ones at the end of the run are going to get less than they need. But then this one will saturate itself, so then more will end up coming down the line. Similarly, this one will saturate, so then most of what's coming in is going to go down the line, and these will start to get as much as they need. The important thing is that we know each of these takes 30. We're going to have 120 per minute coming in, so we know that we've got that ratio right, so these should be running at 100% efficiency. It'll just take a couple of minutes to spin up. So on the other side, we're going to have the corresponding manifold for the outputs, which we're going to do using mergers and sending that back towards that right-hand edge of the platform. These have recipes, but they need power. Now, the power poles have 4 slots, one of which is going to feed power into it, which means we could power up to 3 machines off that. But in a build like this, I like to drop one between every 2 machines. And then we know we've always got a spare slot on every power pole if I need to grab a spur off it for anything. Okay, so we just need a miner down on here. Now I've done all of this build using Mark 1 belts. We mentioned that's not actually enough to take the throughput of this miner on a pure node. That's because I don't have many reinforced iron plates on me right now. But one nice thing that the game lets us do is upgrade the belts in place. So when doing a build like this, you can kind of set everything up using whichever belts you have to hand. You know, usually you're going to have a ton of materials that let you create the lower marks of belts, but if you've only recently unlocked the next tier up, you're going to be a little bit short on those resources, but you can just upgrade them in place once you've got the belts and have ran them. I'm not wild about this curve, so I'm actually just going to redo that. See if we run it all the way here, is that going to clip? Yes, slightly. Let's maybe just run it to there, and to there. It clips very slightly, but I actually don't hate the look of that, especially given this is sand. That doesn't look too bad to me. So, cool. So yeah, having placed the Mark 1 belt, all we need to do is if we switch to our Mark 2 belt, which we can do just by pressing E, or if we hold E, we'll get the radial selector. And then if we just click over anywhere there's a Mark 1 belt, it's going to upgrade that in place to the Mark 2. Now in with this part of the build, what we've got is 120 per minute coming in here. We're going to split 30 off here, which means this run of belt is carrying 90 per minute, so that also needs to be a Mark II belt. But then from here, we've split off 30, 60, so there's only 60 running here, so we're fine to leave this side of the build just using Mark 1 belts. And with the output, it's the opposite. We have 30 here, another 30 merging in, so we've got 60 on this run of belt. Another 30 gets added here, so this run of belt onwards is going to be carrying 90, and then the ultimate output of this thing is going to carry 120, so that needs to be Mark II. So what we're going to do next is to set up some construction over in this part of the build, and these will be creating iron plates and rods and screws, so the raw materials. Before I do that, though, I want to set up the other side of the smelters, so the exact same build I just did, just over here to take another miner's input. So I'll do that, and then we'll check back in when we're ready to start talking about constructors. Alright, that's the next run of smelters set up there, so just doing exactly the same thing as we did before. There's 4 of them. We're taking in the iron ore straight from this second spot where we dropped another miner, Mark II belts in, and then splitting down the line there, and using Mark II belts where we need to, which is here, and here the output would be as well, and Mark 1 belts for the rest of the build. The next thing to think about then is construction. So we've got 240 iron ingots per minute, and we want to turn that into some basic iron products. So we'll be creating iron plates using the standard recipe here, which take 30 per minute. Iron rods, which take 15 per minute, and we'll be using the cast screw recipe here because it means that we don't need to feed iron rods in for screws, we can just go straight with the ingots, and this takes 12.5 per minute. Now we don't have like a target figure in mind here. We need enough of each resource to be able to produce some reinforced iron plates, some modular frames, and some rotors. And between those 3 products, they actually use all 3 of these in various combinations. And we want to have a few left over to send to storage as well, because we are still using these parts on the regular. So I'm thinking we will probably just take the output of the first 4 smelters here, so that's 120 per minute. Send that to create iron plates, so that's going to be 4 constructors worth. And then of the remaining 120 that we've got here, kind of split that evenly between rods and screws. It won't work out exactly to be 100% efficient, because if we do 4 constructors for the rods, those take 15 each per minute, so that's half our resource. And then the casted screw recipe takes 12.5 per minute. So the nearest we can get is if we do 5 constructors with that. And one of them is going to be slightly underfed, right? We don't have a 62.5 spare, we've only got 60 spare, but that's fine, that doesn't cause any problems. So we're going to do the same sort of pattern here with a manifold of splitters, taking in our raw resource from this side, from the right side of the platform, running it down and splitting it off, going into the machines, and then combining those outputs on the other side. So all we need is a lot of constructors. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 for the iron plates. Split in from this side. You might notice, by the way, I'm doing a lot of this, like standing on top of splitters to place the next splitter. It just helps to be looking slightly down over while you're doing it. It's easier to tell if you're like right bang in the middle of a foundation. With a slightly being able to look down on things a little bit, and we don't have, it's going to be a while before we get, you know, jetpacks or anything that let us do that easily, so hence why I like jumping on top of splitters to do some of this logistic work. Now I'm going to take the output of those and run those all on one line once I've grabbed some cables. What we could do is we could take the output of those and feed those directly into assemblers. That I think might get a little bit messy as we try and kind of run the logistics of the build around the place, and also what I do want is to be able to like send stuff off to storage or to the assemblers, and if one of the assemblers gets backfilled, to have what's left going to storage, and if storage gets backfilled, then have what's left available to the assemblers. I think that's a little bit more flexible. So rather than run these straight into assemblers, I'm going to merge them back on a line down towards this end, and we'll split off the line with some going to storage and some going to assemblers. And then a bonus... Oh, I placed a splitter instead of a merger. There we go. A bonus of that means that when we do unlock smart splitters, if we do that anytime in the near future, we can then keep that same setup in place and choose what we want to prioritize, which would probably be prioritize the assemblers and then send what's left as overflow to storage. We can't do that right now, so we're just going to kind of split things evenly and not worry about it too much, given... sorry, I got confused with my belts there. Given that we don't have like a hard target in terms of number of any of these items that we need to produce. So yeah, this is, you know, probably something that we'll iterate on a bit as we go further in the game, but for now it's just going to get us our main goal, which is let's automate this next round of more complex iron products so that we can use them in builds, and so that we can start to combine some of those to make that smart plating, which is our space elevator part. So this has a recipe. These ones don't, so I'm just copy pasting, just hovering over the first one and hitting Control C. And then Control V while I'm hovering over the others to paste those in there. Yeah, so that's kind of how that build looks and what that's going to function like. We've got this line at the end here, so as I said, my current thinking is we'll just take an output of this and split this here, send half of it down towards storage. I'm going to add a storage area somewhere around here, and we'll send the other half forward into the more complex phase of the build where the assemblers are. Before I do that, though, I'm going to want to get these other constructors set up. So we're going to add another 4 here for the iron rods, and then another 5 over this side for the screws. And all of those can run off this second line of 120 iron ore. So this bit should be pretty straightforward. So let me do that, and we'll skip ahead and check back in once that's ready. Okay, so I've given it some thought, and I feel like I've got a bit of a plan for how we want to move forward with this assembler build. So over in our to-do list here, which we get to through the inventory, you can see what we're creating so far. So we're generating 80 plates per minute, 60 rods, and 220 screws. And this should work quite nicely if we go for this build. So 2 assemblers building reinforced plates, 2 assemblers building modular frames, and 1 assembler building rotors. That'll make a decent use of the resource we're generating, but it'll leave us a few of everything left over to go into storage. The reinforced plate build. So 2 assemblers here, they're each going to take 30 iron plates per minute. So this ratio works out quite nicely, actually, to the point where we can just take our output of 3 of our 4 constructors and split that into the 2 assemblers. Hence why I've got rid of the merger in front of this one on the end. This one's just going to loop around and go straight into storage. So that one's pretty straightforward. For the rods and the screws, we're going to have to split those between 2 different sets of assemblers, which are going to be in different positions. And also we're generating enough screws here that we're actually going to, we can't run this on one line anyway. Each of these giving us 50 per minute, or this one at the end giving us slightly less than that. So that's too much even for Mark II belts to carry if we tried to combine all of the screws onto one line. So we've split those out here. But the first 2 should give us the 100 screws, and that works pretty well for one of these recipes. 100 screws go into the rotor build, that's what that takes per minute, and then the other 120 screws will go into the 2 machines making the reinforced iron plates, so this should actually work out quite well. Now what we do need to do is just make sure that we're leaving a decent amount of space here for the logistics. Assemblers are a little bit challenging to place when you're first getting used to them. If I drop this in here, we can see that this kind of takes up the floor of the footprint, kind of takes up the width of one foundation square, which actually means that the bounding box for this extends a little bit more to one side and to the other. So if we drop this in here, you can see we become like kind of misaligned from our grid. It's taken up a foundation square and a bit. So my general way of doing this is to place 1 as this is where this ladder in the middle of the build, which is the center point of the assembler, is in the middle of a foundation square, and then to essentially treat it like it's taking up a square and a half. So then to drop this one here on the break between these 2 foundations. You can see that lines up with the ladder there. That's taken up slightly more space than it strictly needs, but it does make things look a little bit more uniform if it's expanding. You know, every 3 assemblers we're taking up 4 squares worth of foundation. It helps a little bit with placing the splitters and that sort of thing. The other thing is obviously we've got 2 inputs to work with, so we need to work 2 lines into each of these. And that means you've got some amount of production lines crossing over each other to deal with. And there's generally 2 ways that people tend to do this. One is to place the splitters that are handling the resources, with one of them being at like the 2nd level high, like this, and then you just get a curved belt running down like so. Or the other way of doing it is to go 3 high in your stack in terms of splitters, and then that's the right height to use a conveyor lift. And that just goes in like so. There are other ways of doing it, but these are the 2 ones that you kind of tend to commonly see. I use both. The other thing that I tend to do is to nudge this build actually forward. So rather than building flush to the edge of the foundation, as that example is, go 1 step forward. And what that means is your spacing's right for your splitters to then be right in the middle of the foundation. Like so. That to me looks a little bit neater than these being offset, especially given that the front of the assembler is like not lining up with anything particularly neatly anyway. So that works out for me. So that's how I make sure I get the spacing right with these. So yeah, all we really need to do is to figure out how we're going to run our inputs into these builds here. Let me just get rid of this temporary stuff. So we're going to be starting from around about this point, so that one is probably fine if we take that as our first assembler. Make sure we're building in line with that here. So these are plates, so these make sense to be our modular frame assemblers, I think. So we'll just drop a splitter here, so it's in the center of the grid, this way, the way that we're kind of looking at it, and then making sure it lines up obviously with the input there, which we can see from the guidance arrows, and then the next one goes in the same space, aligned with the second input. And this actually needs to be the other way around because we're going to be feeding in screws from that side. Plates coming in from that way. I think that one's actually out of position. And screws coming in from the other side. So what we've got here is the outputs of 3 constructors, giving us 20 plates per minute each. So we've got 60 plates on this line. And that looks nice. So that should be fine. And then this is, I think, yeah, 60 each per minute, so we want our 120 line of screws to run down into these two. So that's this line here, which takes a full 50, and then however many we can get from this one. And in fact, if we run this on a Mark II belt, excuse me, this will saturate that belt at 120, so it'll give us exactly what we need. What we'll have is a few screws that are being produced in here that aren't being used in this build. I might do something with that later if we can find an easy way to get those into storage, but not super concerned about it for the moment. Just going to drop another couple of foundations here so that I don't accidentally fall off the edge of the world. And we want to be running here, and these need to go up to the that height. And then we should just be able to run that straight in. What I'm probably going to do is just smooth out that ramp, just so that it lifts a little faster. And then that just means we've got more space to move under it as we're working around the factory. And that should give us our reinforced iron plates. Now, we also need to use some of these in the modular frame build. With 2 assemblers making modular frames, they're going to take 6 of our reinforced iron plates per minute. We're producing 10 here all told, so we're going to need to merge these outputs first, and then to send some to the modular frame build and some back to storage. So what we'll do here is just have a splitter here, and we'll send the left output off towards the assemblers we're going to add for modular frames, and the right output will go off to our storage, which we're going to add. These guys should be running and producing now. And yeah, we can see, in fact, we've got some from both machines, so that's good. Okay, the next thing that we're going to want is one assembler for rotors. Gonna have to do some management of the belts here. Give it a look and see what we can do. So this is going to take our other 100 screws and 20 of our iron rods. We're producing, I think, 60. Yeah, 60 iron rods. So what I've done here is merge the outputs onto here, and then this splitter here is going to branch off. So that's going to send rods to storage, and this is going to send rods into this assembler here. That one's nice and straightforward. And in fact, this beltwork's not going to be too bad actually, if we just run this here. If we can get it at the same level as this, that'll look quite nice. That's because I've already got a tail coming out of here. This new straight build mode seems to be a little finicky at times. I don't get why that's trying to curve that way. That's confusing. Also, I'm building from the wrong merger there anyway. It's snapping where I don't want it to snap. There we go. That looks alright. And so this needs to be a level 2 belt. And this all needs to be level 2 belts. Just grab some of our reinforced iron plates. Hopefully that's going to be just about enough. Cool, and then this guy needs power. And then that we're just going to send down towards storage as well. And then the last thing we need is 2 more assemblers for the modular frames. So that's where the rest of those rods go. I did think I was missing a trick there. With that many going off to storage, that's not quite what's going to be happening. What we want to do instead is to bring those forward to go into our modular frame assemblers, which we're about to place. So I think actually if I move this power pole, we can just run them down this gap here, and that'll look decent. probably just want to move this splitter a little bit. Let's just turn this merge around to output facing forward. If we split here, just trying to eyeball that to see how that's going to look. That's as near as we're going to get to a straight shot, I think. So we can just pull this down here. Lift it up to go over the top of this one. Okay, and these are the two inputs we're going to need. So we'll probably build these assemblers at this level. Is that in line? Yes, okay. Didn't think it was. And that's going to be our next one, and then we'll have these at this level. That's not going to be very nicely aligned, is it? Maybe we'll come out of this one instead. Like that. That looks a little better. Cool. And then that just needs to be connected there. And then we need recipes and power and outputs for these guys. Cool, so they're taking in 6 of our reinforced plates, they're taking in 24 of our iron rods, and that'll give us 2 modular frames from each of these per minute, so we're getting 4 overall. We're still going to have some iron rods left over. We're using 24 per minute in this build, and we're using, what did I say it was, 20 or something in this one? Yeah, so we've still got 16 rods per minute that we can then send back to storage. which we can do actually by just extending this line out this way. We can drop a stackable pole over the top here. Disconnect that. And then we can turn it, but in a way that's nice. There we go. Cool, so we've got storage for rods, we've got a line for storage for reinforced plates, we have got a line for storage of rotors coming down here, so we'll need to just do a little bit of a loop over the top of this. Let me just extend this here so I don't forget. Don't have any storage of screws because we're using almost all of our screws. I would have to do a bit of load balancing down at the far side there, which I may still do, or I might just keep some of our temporary production here for screws actually. And we've got storage of plates here. So that's all looking pretty good. Next thing that I really want to do is get a little storage area set up to feed, get some storage containers for all of those lines to run into. That's probably going to involve a little bit of belt juggling and a bit of trial and error. So I'll spin the video forward and then we'll walk through what I've done. All right, and that's us done here, I think. So first of all, the screw problem was way easier to load balance than I was giving it credit for. We've essentially got 100 on this line here, so we needed to add 20. And we wanted to split the rest and send those off to storage. So all I did was stick a splitter in front of this machine. Because this should generate 50 per minute, but it's being underfed, and you can see it's just ticking its way up there now. This is going to be running at 80% efficiency, is the way that the maths worked out here. So we can just take the 40 that this will produce, being slightly starved, add 20 to our build for the reinforced iron plates, I think it was, and then send the other 20 off to storage. So it just took a little bit of belt gymnastics to get this to run down over to the end. And speaking of belt gymnastics, there is a fair bit of that going on here, as we've got various outputs and inputs that need to cross over each other. Getting rid of these poles, by the way, this is just an aesthetic choice. I just prefer the free floating belt look. But yeah, essentially what we've got is our modular frames. We're producing 4 per minute from our 2 assemblers on this line here. We have got our rotors. This is an overflow at the end of the 2 builds that we use them in, and this flowing down this line here. We have our reinforced iron plates, which we're producing from these 2 machines here, and we're sending half forward into our modular frame build, and we're sending the other half on this line back to storage. Our rotors are being produced in that assembler at the end here. These are on this line and just coming straight back to storage. And then from the front part of the base, we are producing our iron plates, and we're sending 3 of the 4 constructors worth forward into the reinforced iron plate build, and taking 1 of these outputs, so these 20 per minute, going straight back to storage. And this is our new storage area. So I've just dropped down some storage containers here, ran all of the conveyors down here. The new straight build mode makes doing these curves and kind of getting these to run like, you know, in neat lanes next to each other really easy, which is great. And the thinking here is that just whenever we want stuff, we can just run down this row and grab what we need to. So pretty good basic storage setup that we've got going on here. So yeah, that's pretty good progress. We've essentially made our starting iron factory here null and void, so I'm going to be tearing that down. And this will just see us through in terms of production and storage of basic iron parts. Anything that's more complex than here we'll probably do as like a bespoke build. For example, smart plating. I'll give it some thought. We might want to split off some of our outputs that we're putting here and use those towards smart plating, or we might just want to set up a little self-contained kind of smart plate factory to go from raw resource through to that one end resource. The other thing, as mentioned earlier, that I need to do next is to scale out our concrete production. So right now that's sitting on a pure node capable of generating 120 per minute, but we've only got two constructors on there, so I'll scale that out, add a third constructor. And then I want to give a similar sort of treatment to what we've done with iron over to our copper production, which is happening over here. That will be simpler because we've only got simple copper parts now. We've only got wire, which is one-stage production, cable, which is two-stage production, already using wire, and copper sheets. There's nothing as complex as reinforced iron plates or anything like that in our tech tree for copper at the moment. But I still want to get it on some platforms and, you know, use some manifolds and stuff to essentially get rid of this like messy build, and so that we can build more higher volumes of wire and cables and start to get some copper sheets coming through as well, because we are going to need all of that stuff. There's nothing different about this concrete expansion or this copper expansion than what we've covered today, so I'm going to do those builds offline. What I don't want to do is create a bunch of content that's doing very similar stuff over and over. So when we check back in, I expect this to look quite different. Next episode, we'll have got through those basics and we'll start to look at what the next tier of complexity is, which I'm guessing will probably be our smart plate build, and then we'll start to make progress on space elevator stuff. So yeah, hopefully that was a useful and enjoyable little tour of how I go about expanding out iron from, you know, very simple and messy to something a bit more complex and regimented. And yeah, thanks as always for watching, and look forward to catching you on the next episode of our Satisfactory playthrough. Cheers.